Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history in the Arkansas Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the autumn of 1962, construction workers renovating an abandoned farmhouse near Ponca, Arkansas, made a discovery that would haunt the local community for decades. What they found in the attic of the old Whitmore property defied explanation and challenged everything residents thought they knew about the reclusive brothers who had lived there nearly a century before. The house stood on a ridge overlooking the Buffalo National River, about 12 miles southeast of Harrison in Newton County. Built in 1874 by brothers Caleb and Josiah Whitmore, the structure had remained empty since their mysterious departure in 1878. Local records indicated the property had changed hands multiple times, but no family had ever stayed longer than a few months. Most claimed the house felt wrong somehow, though they could never articulate exactly why. The construction crew had been hired to assess the building's structural integrity before a planned demolition. Foreman Rupert Gaines later described finding a concealed entrance behind what appeared to be a false wall in the second-floor hallway. Behind this barrier lay a narrow staircase leading to an attic space that official blueprints suggested should not have existed. What Gaines and his team discovered in that hidden chamber would eventually be documented in a brief report filed with the Newton County Sheriff's Department, though the full details were never released to the public. According to surviving fragments of that report, the attic contained an elaborate series of interconnected rooms filled with mysterious equipment whose purpose remains unknown to this day. The Whitmore brothers had arrived in Newton County during the winter of 1873, purchasing 160 acres of remote hill country with cash carried in worn leather satchels. Land records indicate they paid significantly above market value to county clerk Mordecai Phelps, suggesting urgency in their acquisition that puzzled local officials. Phelps later described the transaction as the strangest in his 20-year career, noting that both brothers seemed more concerned with the property's isolation than its potential for farming or development. Caleb, the elder at 32, and Josiah, 28, claimed to be from Tennessee, though no documentation supported this assertion when Phelps attempted to verify their backgrounds for the deed transfer. Contemporary accounts describe the brothers as quiet, methodical men who maintained an unusual level of privacy even by frontier standards. Caleb was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and pale blue eyes that neighbors remembered as unsettling in their unblinking intensity. Josiah appeared younger than his years, with dark hair and a habit of speaking in whispers that forced listeners to lean uncomfortably close to understand his words. Neither man ever mentioned family, previous occupations, or their reasons for settling in such a remote location when questioned by curious neighbors. They deflected inquiries with vague references to scientific research and a desire for solitude that discouraged further conversation. Most residents accepted these explanations and left the brothers alone, respecting the frontier tradition of not prying into personal histories that might contain difficult or sensitive information. The brothers hired local workers to construct their house during the spring of 1874, but only for the foundation and basic framework. All interior work, particularly anything involving the upper floors, they completed themselves without assistance or oversight. This decision struck some neighbors as unusual, given their apparent lack of construction experience, but the brothers insisted they had specific requirements that would be difficult to explain to hired workers unfamiliar with their particular needs. Throughout 1874 and into 1875, unusual deliveries arrived at the Whitmore property with increasing frequency and mysterious content. Wagons would approach the house at dawn or dusk, carrying unmarked crates and carefully wrapped packages that seemed to require delicate handling. Local freight handlers like Simeon Grady and his sons noted these shipments often came from distant cities like St. Louis, Little Rock, and even Chicago, containing materials that seemed far too sophisticated for typical frontier farming operations. The shipping manifests, when Grady glimpsed them during loading, listed items with technical descriptions that meant nothing to rural freight handlers accustomed to agricultural supplies and household goods. Terms like precision instruments, optical equipment, and specialized apparatus appeared frequently, along with weights and handling instructions that suggested expensive, delicate materials rather than the simple tools and basic supplies typical of frontier deliveries. When questioned about these unusual shipments, the brothers explained they were conducting research into natural phenomena, studying geological formations and atmospheric conditions that required specialized equipment for accurate measurement and documentation. They spoke knowledgeably about scientific methods and research procedures in ways that impressed local residents, but their explanations never quite matched the apparent complexity or expense of their deliveries. The community accepted these explanations partly because few people ventured close enough to the Whitmore property to observe their activities directly. The house sat at the end of a winding dirt road that discouraged casual visits, climbing through dense timber for nearly 3 miles before reaching the cleared ridge where the brothers had established their isolated homestead. Dense stands of oak and hickory trees blocked most lines of sight from neighboring farms, creating natural barriers that preserved the brothers' privacy while fostering curiosity about their mysterious activities. Even during daylight hours, the property maintained an atmosphere that made visitors uncomfortable in ways they found difficult to explain or justify. The surrounding forest seemed unusually quiet, lacking the bird songs and insect sounds typical of Arkansas woodlands during spring and summer months. Travelers on the road reported feeling watched by unseen observers, though careful searches revealed no evidence of human presence in the thick undergrowth that pressed close to the narrow track leading to the house. By late 1875, construction sounds from the Whitmore house had ceased entirely, though neighbors occasionally heard what appeared to be modification or renovation work continuing at irregular intervals throughout the following months. Residents assumed the brothers had completed their basic home and were making improvements based on experience with Arkansas weather and living conditions. However, those living within a few miles began reporting unusual disturbances that seemed to emanate from the direction of the Whitmore property with troubling consistency. These reports followed patterns that became more defined as weeks passed into months. During the deepest hours of night, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, residents would hear what sounded like systematic construction work, but with rhythms and techniques that seemed different from normal building or repair activities. The sounds carried clearly through the still mountain air, but ceased abruptly if anyone attempted to approach their source, as if the brothers maintained constant vigilance against unwanted observers or unexpected visitors. Some described hearing voices during these nocturnal work sessions, though the words were never clear enough to understand at the distances from which they could be safely observed. The vocal tones suggested intense concentration and careful coordination rather than casual conversation, with one voice frequently providing what appeared to be detailed instructions, while the other responded with brief acknowledgments and occasional questions. More puzzling were the unusual smells that occasionally drifted from the Whitmore land during certain weather conditions. When winds blew from the southwest, particularly during humid summer evenings, neighbors detected strong chemical odors, unlike anything produced by normal farming activities or household routines. These scents were sharp and medicinal, sometimes accompanied by metallic smells that reminded people of heated metal or complex machinery operating under heavy loads. Ezekiel Burrows, whose farm lay closest to the Whitmore property on the eastern slope, maintained detailed weather records and noted correlations between wind direction and the intensity of these mysterious chemical odors. His journals, discovered during a state settlement in 1923, documented over 40 instances of unusual smells strong enough to be detected at his farmhouse, nearly 2 miles from the Whitmore house. Burroughs also recorded observations of unusual smoke patterns rising from the Whitmore chimney during periods when these chemical odors were strongest. Instead of the steady gray smoke typical of wood fires, the brothers' chimney sometimes produced dense, dark emissions that lingered close to the ground rather than dispersing normally into the atmosphere. These smoke episodes typically lasted several hours and were followed by periods when no smoke appeared at all, despite cold weather that should have required continuous heating for basic comfort. Local physician Dr. Micah Thornberry made several attempts to visit the Whitmore brothers during this period, ostensibly to offer his services to the isolated community, but actually responding to concerns raised by patients who lived near the property. Each time, one of the brothers would meet him at the property's gate, politely declining any assistance and explaining that both men enjoyed excellent health and had no need for medical consultation or routine care. Dr. Thornberry later noted that these brief encounters left him with strong impressions of nervousness and concealment, though he could identify no specific cause for his growing unease. The brothers seemed alert and physically healthy, but their behavior suggested constant awareness of potential complications that required their immediate attention if circumstances changed unexpectedly. Most puzzling was the brothers' apparent familiarity with medical and scientific terminology that seemed far beyond what farmers should possess, even those engaged in agricultural research. During one encounter, Josiah casually mentioned technical details about atmospheric pressure and geological formations that impressed Dr. Thornberry with their accuracy and sophistication. When questioned about this knowledge, Josiah explained that their research required understanding of natural processes, but his explanations seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. The brothers made infrequent appearances in Harrison to purchase supplies, always arriving separately and conducting their business with minimal conversation that suggested careful planning to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. Store owners remember them as punctual customers who paid in cash and never questioned prices, but their purchases included items that seemed more suited to scientific research or mechanical projects than typical farming activities. Ezra Hutchins, who operated the general store on the town square, kept detailed records of customer transactions as required by territorial law. His ledgers, discovered in 1961 during the store's demolition, revealed the brothers made increasingly expensive and unusual purchases throughout 1875 and 1876. They bought significant amounts of specialized chemicals whose names Hutchins had difficulty spelling, precision metal fittings that required special orders from distant suppliers, and unusual tools that seemed designed for applications he could not imagine. The brothers also purchased materials that suggested they were conducting experiments requiring careful environmental control and precise measurement. They ordered glass containers of various sizes, rubber tubing and sealing materials, and measuring instruments that seemed far more sophisticated than anything required for agricultural research or basic scientific observation. During the summer of 1876, the strange nocturnal activities from the Whitmore property intensified in both frequency and apparent complexity. Residents reported seeing lights moving through the woods around the house at all hours, as if someone were conducting systematic surveys or patrols of the surrounding terrain. The lights followed organized patterns that suggested methodical exploration rather than casual evening walks or routine property maintenance. The construction sounds became more frequent and seemed to come from different locations each night. suggesting the brothers were expanding whatever project occupied their time or creating additional facilities to support their mysterious research activities. Some witnesses reported hearing what sounded like complex machinery in operation, though no such equipment had ever been observed entering the property through the single road that provided access to their isolated ridge. Mrs. Adelaide Kemp, whose farm bordered the Whitmore property to the south across a shallow valley, provided the most detailed contemporary account of the brothers' behavior during this intensified period. In letters to her sister Margaret in Little Rock, Mrs. Kemp described observing the brothers through field glasses as they worked around their property during daylight hours when they apparently believed themselves unobserved. According to her correspondence, the brothers had cleared several acres behind their house and constructed what appeared to be a series of workshops or specialized buildings connected by covered walkways that prevented observers from seeing activities that took place between structures. These buildings varied in size and apparent function, with some featuring elaborate ventilation systems while others seemed designed for activities requiring complete environmental isolation. The covered walkways were constructed with walls high enough to conceal anyone moving between buildings, creating a complex that functioned as a single integrated facility despite its distributed appearance. The entire arrangement suggested operations that required both privacy and systematic organization, with different activities conducted in specialized locations according to carefully planned procedures. More unsettling was Mrs. Kemp's observation that the brothers appeared to maintain different schedules that maximized security while ensuring continuous supervision of whatever processes they were conducting. One would work during daylight hours, while the other remained inside the house, presumably resting or performing indoor tasks that required constant attention. At sunset, they would switch positions with military precision, the day worker retreating indoors, while his brother emerged to continue whatever tasks required completion under cover of darkness. This systematic approach to scheduling suggested operations that could not be safely interrupted or that required 24-hour monitoring to maintain proper conditions. Mrs. Kemp noted that the transitions between shifts occurred at exactly the same times each day, indicating discipline and planning that seemed inconsistent with casual research activities or agricultural experiments. Mrs. Kemp also noted that the brothers had modified their house extensively since its original construction, making changes that seemed designed to enhance security and privacy, rather than improve comfort or convenience. They had boarded up most of the windows, leaving only narrow slots that provided limited views of the interior while allowing occupants to observe the surrounding area without being seen themselves. Heavy curtains blocked even these small openings during hours of interior illumination, creating a fortress-like appearance that seemed inconsistent with normal domestic life. The front porch, originally built to encourage social interaction with neighbors, had been enclosed with solid walls that eliminated opportunities for casual conversation while creating a secure transition zone between the house and the surrounding grounds. The autumn of 1876 brought the first reports of sounds that defied easy explanation and suggested activities far more complex than agricultural research or simple scientific observation. Multiple witnesses described hearing what sounded like systematic mechanical operations, but involving equipment far more sophisticated than anything that should have been available in rural Arkansas during that historical period. These sounds never lasted long and were often dismissed initially as imagination or misidentification of natural phenomena. However, the consistency of these reports and their timing created growing unease among local residents, who began comparing notes and realizing that similar experiences were occurring across multiple households within hearing distance of the Whitmore property. The mechanical sounds always occurred during the early morning hours, typically between 3 and 4 o'clock, and seemed to come from directly above the Whitmore house rather than from the surrounding grounds or outbuildings. This elevation suggested the sounds originated from the building's upper floors, though neighbors had never observed activity in those areas during daylight hours or evening observations. Most disturbing was the apparent pattern of these mechanical operations, which suggested systematic rather than experimental activities. Witnesses reported hearing sequences that began with preparation sounds, escalated to intensive operation periods, and then ceased abruptly as if the equipment had been systematically shut down according to predetermined procedures. Deacon Phineas Crowley of the Harrison Methodist Church attempted to visit the brothers in November 1876, concerned about their apparent isolation from the religious community and responding to requests from parishioners who lived near the Whitmore property. He later described this encounter in a letter to his denominational superiors, expressing profound discomfort with what he observed and requesting guidance on how to address situations that challenged his pastoral experience. According to Deacon Crowley's account, Josiah Whitmore met him at the property's gate and refused to allow him onto the grounds, explaining that his brother was occupied with time-sensitive research that could not be interrupted. During their brief conversation, Crowley noticed that Josiah appeared exhausted and agitated, frequently glancing back toward the house, as if monitoring something inside that required constant attention. Most puzzling was Josiah's physical condition during this encounter. His hand showed stains that appeared to be chemical in nature, and his clothing carried the sharp odors that neighbors had been reporting for months. His fingernails showed evidence of recent work with metals or machinery, and his boots were marked with substances that Crowley could not identify but found somehow unsettling. When Crowley asked about the nature of their research activities, hoping to understand why the brothers required such complete isolation and secrecy, Josiah's responses became increasingly vague and contradictory. He claimed they were studying geological formations and atmospheric phenomena, but his explanations included technical terms that seemed more related to mechanical engineering than natural science observation. Throughout their conversation, which lasted only 15 minutes but felt much longer to Deacon Crowley, he could hear what sounded like complex machinery operating somewhere inside the house. The sounds were systematic and rhythmic, suggesting equipment designed for precise operations rather than simple tools or household implements. Most unsettling was a series of mechanical sounds that seemed to come from the upper floors of the house, resembling clockwork mechanisms or precision instruments operating according to predetermined patterns. These sounds were brief but distinct, and Josiah's obvious nervousness when they occurred suggested they were not part of normal household routines or simple research equipment. The winter of 1876 to 1877 marked a period of decreased external activity from the Whitmore property, though residents later realized this apparent quiet concealed intensified efforts that were simply better hidden from casual observation. The nocturnal mechanical sounds ceased almost entirely, and neighbors rarely observed the brothers outside their house during daylight hours. Some residents speculated that whatever project had occupied them was finally complete, while others worried that technical problems or equipment failures had disrupted their mysterious activities. Mrs. Kemp's letters from this period describe weeks of absolute silence from the neighboring property that felt more ominous than the previous mechanical disturbances. Snow cover revealed no tracks leading to or from the house, suggesting the brothers rarely ventured outside during the coldest months or had developed alternative methods of movement that avoided leaving obvious traces in the frozen ground. Smoke continued to rise from the house chimney, indicating at least one occupant remained alive and active, but the smoke patterns were different from those observed during previous months. Instead of the irregular emissions that had characterized their mysterious activities, the chimney now produced steady, controlled smoke that suggested more conventional heating and domestic activities. However, careful observers noted that this apparent normalization was itself suspicious. as if the brothers were deliberately creating impressions of normal domestic life while actually conducting activities that required even greater secrecy than their previous operations. The very consistency of the smoke patterns seemed artificial compared to the natural variations that would result from genuine household routines. This period of apparent quiet ended abruptly in March 1877, when residents reported renewed activity, but of a character completely different from the systematic mechanical sounds they had heard before. Instead of organized operational periods, witnesses now described erratic episodes that lasted for several hours before stopping suddenly, as if whatever was causing them had encountered unexpected complications or equipment failures. These disturbances followed no predictable schedule and seemed to involve intensive troubleshooting or repair work rather than normal research procedures. Residents could hear what sounded like mechanical adjustments, punctuated by testing periods, followed by intervals of intensive work that seemed designed to solve technical problems rather than conduct routine operations. The randomness of these episodes was particularly disturbing because it contrasted sharply with the methodical approach the brothers had previously demonstrated in all their activities. Something had changed in their operations that introduced elements of urgency or crisis management that had not been present during the systematic construction and setup phases. Dr. Thornberry, whose practice included several farms in the area, noted a significant increase in reports of anxiety and sleep disturbances among families living within earshot of the Whitmore property. Patients complained of persistent nightmares, unexplained nervousness during daylight hours, and an inability to feel secure in their own homes, despite having no direct contact with the brothers or specific knowledge of their activities. These psychological effects seemed to intensify in proportion to proximity to the Whitmore house, with families living closest reporting the most severe symptoms. Adults described feeling constantly observed when working in fields or traveling roads that offered views of the Whitmore property, though no evidence of actual surveillance was ever detected despite careful searches of the surrounding terrain. The final phase of the Whitmore occupation began in late spring 1877 and continued through the following winter, representing a period of activity that challenged rational explanation while remaining technically within the bounds of natural possibility. During these months, the property became the source of phenomena that tested the limits of what isolated rural residents were prepared to accept or ignore. Witnesses reported seeing lights moving through the upper floors of the house at all hours, but these lights appeared to follow routes that seemed impossible based on the building's external dimensions and visible architectural features. The illumination moved in organized patterns that suggested systematic inspections or routine monitoring of facilities that had been completely hidden from outside observation. The lights never appeared in windows that had been boarded up, implying the existence of interior spaces that had no direct connection to the building's original room layout. Sometimes multiple lights could be seen simultaneously, indicating either the presence of several people or the use of artificial illumination systems that could be controlled remotely or automatically. Most unsettling was the apparent coordination of these light movements, which followed patterns that repeated over several nights before changing to new configurations. This systematic approach suggested the lights were not random exploration, but rather routine monitoring of facilities that required regular inspection according to predetermined schedules. The sounds during this final period were perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire Whitmore mystery, representing an escalation that pushed the boundaries of what neighbors were willing to tolerate or ignore. Residents described hearing what could only be characterized as complex industrial operations, though no manufacturing equipment of sufficient size had ever been observed entering the property through its single access road. These mechanical sounds suggested the presence of devices designed for precision manufacturing or systematic processing, rather than the simple tools appropriate for agricultural work or basic scientific observation. The rhythms were consistent with automated processes that required minimal human intervention once properly calibrated and initiated. More troubling was the apparent integration of these mechanical sounds with human activity that seemed to coordinate with or monitor the automated processes. Witnesses reported hearing what sounded like systematic inspections or quality control procedures being conducted alongside the mechanical operations, as if people were working in close cooperation with complex equipment to ensure proper results. The coordination between mechanical and human activity never formed recognizable patterns at the distances from which they could be safely observed, but the rhythmic nature was unmistakable even to listeners who could not understand the specific procedures being conducted. The sounds carried tones of systematic work proceeding according to established procedures rather than experimental trial and error. Most disturbing were occasional episodes that seemed to indicate equipment malfunctions or procedural complications, though these were always brief and quickly resolved, as if the brothers possessed extensive experience in troubleshooting complex technical problems. These episodes typically occurred during the deepest hours of night and were followed by periods of intensive activity that suggested systematic maintenance or recalibration procedures. The end came suddenly in February 1878, though the exact sequence of events would never be clearly established due to the brothers' successful efforts to eliminate evidence of their activities before departure. Neighbors noticed that smoke had stopped rising from the Whitmore chimney during a particularly cold week, though mechanical sounds from the house continued for several days after this observation, suggesting automated systems were operating without human supervision. When these sounds also ceased, the property fell into a silence so complete that it seemed to absorb sound from the surrounding landscape. Birds stopped singing in the trees near the house, and even wind seemed to avoid the immediate area, creating an acoustic void that made neighboring farmers uncomfortable when working in fields that faced the Whitmore Ridge. Mrs. Kemp organized a group of neighbors to approach the house after a week of total silence, motivated by concerns about the brothers' welfare during severe winter weather, but also by curiosity about the sudden termination of activities that had dominated local attention for over 3 years. The group included her husband Cornelius, neighboring farmer Thaddeus Millsap, and Dr. Thornberry, providing medical expertise in case the brothers had succumbed to illness or accident. They found the front door standing open despite freezing temperatures, and the interior completely empty of furniture or personal belongings. However, the condition of the rooms suggested systematic evacuation rather than hasty abandonment, with clear evidence that valuable materials had been carefully removed while less important items had been left behind. The wooden floors throughout the house showed unusual wear patterns that suggested heavy equipment had been moved systematically through the rooms over extended periods. These patterns were inconsistent with normal household furniture or agricultural tools, implying the presence of specialized devices that had been installed, operated, and then carefully removed. More puzzling were the modifications the brothers had made to the building's interior structure during their residence. Walls had been removed or relocated to create open spaces between rooms that seemed designed for housing large equipment rather than normal domestic activities. These changes eliminated standard room divisions and created flowing spaces that would accommodate complex installations. The group discovered that several doorways had been enlarged and reinforced to allow passage of heavy equipment, with modifications that seemed inconsistent with normal household needs. These changes appeared designed to facilitate moving substantial machinery through the building rather than simply improving convenience or comfort for daily living. Most puzzling was the apparent absence of any access to the house's upper floors, where witnesses had consistently observed lights and heard sounds throughout the brothers' residence. The original staircase had been completely removed, and no alternative means of reaching the second floor was evident from the main living areas, creating an architectural mystery that challenged everything neighbors thought they knew about the building. This discovery was particularly troubling given the numerous reports of lights and mechanical sounds that had clearly originated from the building's upper levels throughout the preceding years. The absence of obvious access routes suggested the brothers had created concealed entrances that were not apparent to casual inspection, implying levels of construction sophistication that seemed inconsistent with their apparent rural background. Local authorities conducted a brief investigation of the abandoned property but reached conclusions that satisfied legal requirements while avoiding deeper questions about the brothers' mysterious activities. The Newton County Sheriff's Report, dated March 15, 1878, concluded that the Whitmore brothers had simply chosen to relocate without informing their neighbors, citing no territorial laws requiring such notification. Sheriff Augustus Bramwell's official statement noted that while the brothers' departure was sudden and their destination unknown, no evidence of illegal activity had been discovered during the investigation. He attributed the unusual modifications to the house as eccentric personal preferences and suggested the brothers were simply unconventional individuals who valued privacy above social convention. However, unofficial accounts suggest the investigation revealed details that were deliberately excluded from the public record to avoid causing alarm among rural residents who were already unsettled by 3 years of mysterious disturbances. Deputy Marshal Obadiah Mills, who participated in the search, later confided to family members that the house contained evidence of activities that puzzled even experienced law enforcement personnel. According to Mills's private statements, recorded in family letters that became available during a state settlement in 1924, the interior modifications were far more extensive than the official report indicated. The brothers had created a complex system of hidden passages and concealed rooms that extended throughout the entire structure, with these spaces accessible through carefully disguised entrances that required specific knowledge to locate and operate. Mills described finding unusual equipment in these hidden areas that seemed designed for purposes he could not identify, but that clearly fell outside normal agricultural or domestic applications. The devices were unlike anything he had encountered in his law enforcement career, combining mechanical precision with functions that remained completely mysterious despite detailed examination. The most significant discovery, according to Mill's account, was evidence that the missing upper floor access had been deliberately concealed rather than simply removed during renovation. Behind what appeared to be a solid wall, investigators found a narrow staircase that led to extensive attic spaces where the brothers had conducted their most secretive activities. This staircase was equipped with concealment mechanisms that seemed designed to prevent unwanted access rather than provide convenient transportation between floors. The entrance could be sealed from above in ways that would make the staircase completely invisible to anyone searching the main floor without specific knowledge of its location and operating procedures. Mills noted that the hidden staircase showed evidence of heavy use, with wear patterns that suggested frequent transport of equipment and materials between the main house and the attic facilities over the entire period of the brothers' residence. The steps bore marks from heavy objects being moved carefully up and down, indicating systematic transportation of substantial materials. The attic spaces themselves were too complex for Mills to describe adequately in private correspondence, even years after the investigation. He mentioned finding evidence of systematic operations that challenged his understanding of what two individuals could accomplish with the resources available in rural Arkansas during the 1870s. Most significantly, Mills reported that the attic facilities appeared to have been carefully dismantled before the brothers' departure, with only foundations and support structures remaining to indicate what had once been installed there. This systematic removal suggested the brothers had successfully relocated their equipment rather than simply abandoning it. The property remained vacant for nearly 8 decades following the Whitmore brothers' departure, establishing a pattern of brief ownership periods followed by hasty resales that created legal complications and persistent local concerns about the land's suitability for development. Multiple attempts were made to sell or develop the property, but potential buyers invariably withdrew their interest after spending time on the premises. Real estate records document a succession of transactions that followed remarkably similar patterns. New owners would purchase the property with plans for renovation or development, spend several weeks or months attempting to implement their projects, and then abandon their efforts while accepting significant financial losses, rather than continue their involvement with the land. These failures were typically attributed to structural problems, unexpected costs, or changes in personal circumstances, but the consistency of the pattern suggested deeper issues that buyers were reluctant to discuss publicly. Most described feeling uncomfortable on the property without being able to identify specific causes for their persistent unease. Local residents gradually developed an unspoken agreement to avoid the abandoned property entirely, treating it as if it carried some form of environmental contamination that could affect anyone who spent extended time there. Parents instructed their children to stay away from the area, citing structural dangers and unstable terrain, but these warnings carried emotional weight that suggested concerns beyond simple physical safety. Over the decades, occasional reports surfaced of unusual phenomena occurring in the vicinity of the old Whitmore house, though these accounts were typically dismissed as imagination or misinterpretation by anyone who had not experienced them directly. The reports typically involved travelers or hunters who ventured too close to the property and experienced sensations that challenged rational explanation. Most described feeling observed by unseen watchers, though careful searches revealed no evidence of human presence in the area. Others reported hearing sounds that seemed to echo from locations that should have been empty, including mechanical noises that resembled the operations witnesses had reported during the brothers' residence decades earlier. The house itself deteriorated slowly over the decades, its robust construction allowing it to withstand neglect while maintaining a disturbing presence on the landscape. Vines and undergrowth gradually obscured its outline, but the building's dark bulk remained visible through the vegetation, serving as a persistent reminder of mysteries that had never been resolved or adequately explained. Even in its declining state, the house seemed to resist normal processes of decay and natural reclamation. While other abandoned buildings in the area succumbed quickly to weather and vegetation, the Whitmore house maintained structural integrity that seemed almost intentional in its persistence, as if the building had been designed to endure far longer than normal construction would allow. In 1961, the property was finally acquired by developers planning to construct a resort facility catering to tourists visiting the nearby Buffalo National River. The acquisition required extensive legal work to clear decades of accumulated liens and abandoned ownership claims, but the location's scenic value and recreational potential made the effort financially worthwhile despite the property's problematic history. Initial site surveys revealed that the old house remained structurally sound despite its long abandonment, though inspection teams reported unusual architectural features that complicated renovation planning. The building's interior layout seemed inconsistent with normal domestic construction, featuring spaces that appeared larger or smaller than their external dimensions suggested, and corridors that seemed to lead to destinations that did not correspond to the building's apparent structure. These anomalies were initially attributed to age-related settling or amateur modifications made by previous owners who lacked proper construction knowledge. However, more detailed examination revealed that the structural irregularities were intentional design elements rather than accidental features, suggesting someone had deliberately created an interior environment that defied conventional architectural logic. Professional architects brought in to assess renovation possibilities found themselves unable to create accurate floor plans despite repeated measurements and careful documentation. The building seemed to resist systematic analysis, with dimensions that appeared to vary between visits and spatial relationships that could not be reconciled with normal geometric principles. These technical difficulties led to increasing costs and delays that eventually made renovation economically unfeasible. The decision to demolish rather than renovate was made after construction supervisors reported persistent problems with work crews who experienced disorientation and equipment malfunctions when working inside the building for extended periods. When demolition began in September 1962, crews started with standard procedures for removing obvious structural elements, but quickly encountered complications that transformed a routine project into the most challenging assignment of Foreman Gaines's 30-year career. The building seemed designed to resist systematic deconstruction, with hidden structural connections and concealed support elements that made orderly dismantling nearly impossible. Standard demolition techniques proved ineffective because removing any single element caused unexpected consequences throughout the building. Components that appeared to be non-structural were actually essential parts of complex systems that extended far beyond their visible boundaries, creating engineering puzzles that frustrated experienced construction professionals. The discovery of the hidden attic entrance occurred during the third week of demolition, when Gaines personally took over the examination of interior walls that had been causing persistent problems for his crew. Workers had been attempting to remove what appeared to be a decorative wall panel when Gaines noticed that the section seemed inconsistent with adjacent construction. Careful examination revealed that what looked like solid construction was actually an elaborate concealment system. When specific pressure was applied to particular points, the entire section shifted inward on hidden mechanisms, revealing the narrow staircase that led upward into darkness beyond the range of standard lighting equipment. The staircase was steep and narrow, constructed with the same heavy timber as the rest of the house, but clearly added after original building completion. Most puzzling was evidence of sophisticated concealment mechanisms that could render the entrance completely invisible when properly activated, requiring specific knowledge to locate and operate successfully. Gaines climbed the hidden staircase alone, carrying emergency lighting and basic tools for preliminary exploration. What he found in the attic spaces challenged every assumption about the building's purpose and the nature of the brothers' activities during their years of isolation on the Arkansas Ridge. The attic had been completely transformed from typical storage space into a complex series of interconnected chambers, each apparently designed for specific purposes that remained mysterious despite extensive examination. The brothers had created a sophisticated facility that combined workshop capabilities with specialized areas whose functions could only be guessed at from the architectural modifications and remaining structural elements. The first room contained evidence of an elaborate workshop that had once been equipped with machinery far more advanced than anything typically available in 1870s rural Arkansas. Foundation points and power transmission systems suggested the presence of precision equipment that had been carefully removed before the brothers' departure, leaving only mounting points and support structures to indicate what had once been installed. Connected to the main workshop area was a smaller chamber that appeared to have functioned as a laboratory, equipped for complex analysis and experimentation. Built-in shelving and specialized ventilation systems suggested activities requiring careful environmental control and precise measurement capabilities that exceeded anything needed for simple agricultural research. the laboratory led to additional rooms that showed evidence of increasingly sophisticated operations, with each space designed for specific activities that required isolation from the others while maintaining systematic workflow connections. The entire complex represented years of careful planning and construction, creating capabilities that seemed far beyond what two individuals should have been able to accomplish with available resources. The final chamber was the largest and most elaborately designed space in the entire complex. Here, the brothers had created what appeared to be an observation and control facility, with elevated positions that provided oversight of all other areas through carefully positioned openings that functioned as concealed monitoring points. This arrangement suggested that much of the brothers' work had involved systematic observation and documentation of activities conducted in the adjacent chambers, requiring vantage points that would allow detailed monitoring without interfering with ongoing procedures. The facility represented a level of organization and planning that challenged assumptions about frontier capabilities and individual resources. Gaines documented these discoveries with extensive photographs and detailed written descriptions, understanding that he had found evidence of activities that extended far beyond normal historical expectations for rural 19th century operations. However, his report to county authorities resulted in immediate orders to cease all investigation and complete the demolition as quickly as possible. Official explanations cited safety concerns and potential structural hazards, but the speed with which authorities moved to suppress information suggested motivations that extended beyond routine construction site management. Local officials seemed more concerned with preventing public knowledge of the discovery than with understanding its historical significance or investigating potential connections to unsolved regional mysteries. The demolition was completed within a week of the attic discovery, with all materials burned on site rather than removed for disposal elsewhere. This unusual procedure created additional costs that made no economic sense unless the goal was complete elimination of physical evidence rather than efficient waste management and site preparation. Workers were instructed to sign agreements restricting discussion of their observations, creating legal obligations that most honored for decades afterward. These agreements included significant penalties for unauthorized disclosure, providing strong incentives for maintaining silence about discoveries that might otherwise have generated considerable historical and academic interest. However, Gaines preserved copies of his photographs and documentation, storing them in a bank safety deposit box with instructions that they be released only after his death. These materials became available in 1987 when his estate was settled, providing the only detailed record of what the Whitmore brothers had created in their hidden attic facility. The photographs reveal spaces that demonstrate remarkable precision and organization, with every element having its designated location and every surface showing evidence of careful maintenance that suggested ongoing use rather than experimental or occasional activities. This attention to systematic detail indicates the brothers operated their facility as a professional operation rather than casual hobby or research project. Analysis of the architectural modifications by experts who examined Gaines' documentation during the 1990s revealed engineering capabilities that were remarkably advanced for the 1870s period. The structural modifications required knowledge of load distribution and environmental control that seemed inconsistent with typical frontier construction experience, suggesting access to technical education or professional consultation. Perhaps most significantly, clear evidence indicated that the entire attic complex had been designed and constructed with systematic removal in mind, featuring modular components and standardized connections that would facilitate complete relocation if circumstances required such measures. The brothers had apparently planned for eventual departure from the beginning of their operations. The fate of Caleb and Josiah Whitmore remains one of Arkansas's most persistent unsolved mysteries, with no reliable records documenting their departure from Newton County or subsequent activities anywhere else in the region. Their names appear in no census records after 1878, and no death certificates or burial records have been located despite extensive genealogical research conducted by multiple historians over the past century. Some investigators have suggested the brothers successfully relocated their entire operation to continue their work in other isolated locations, where they could operate without the scrutiny that their Arkansas activities had gradually attracted from neighboring residents. The systematic nature of their facility design and the evidence of planned relocation capabilities supports this theory. Others believe the brothers may have been part of a larger organization or research network that could provide ongoing support for complex technical operations requiring substantial resources and specialized knowledge. Their sudden departure and successful concealment of their destination suggests access to networks that could facilitate complete disappearance when circumstances required such measures. The permanent absence of any trace of the brothers after February 1878 suggests either complete success in concealing their fate or complete success in relocating their operations to locations where they could continue their work without detection. Either possibility represents capabilities that seem remarkable for two individuals operating in isolation during the frontier period. The land where the Whitmore house stood remained undeveloped for another 2 decades after the 1962 demolition, with subsequent attempts to build on the site encountering persistent technical problems that made construction economically unfeasible. Foundation work revealed extensive underground modifications that the brothers had apparently made to support their complex operations, creating structural complications that deterred potential developers. Excavation efforts revealed a sophisticated network of underground chambers and passages that extended far beyond the footprint of the original house, suggesting the brothers' activities had involved far more extensive construction than anyone had realized during their residence. These subterranean facilities included environmental control systems and specialized storage areas that supported operations requiring precise conditions and systematic organization. Most puzzling were underground connections that extended beyond the immediate building area, linking the house to locations throughout the surrounding property where no surface evidence of construction had ever been observed during the brothers' residence. These passages were carefully engineered with proper drainage and ventilation, representing major construction projects that should have required heavy equipment and multiple workers, but had somehow been completed without detection. Local residents continue to avoid the area decades after demolition, maintaining the informal prohibition that developed during the years following the brothers' departure. Even experienced outdoorsmen report feeling uncomfortable when hiking trails that pass near the former Whitmore property, citing atmospheric conditions that seem inconsistent with the surrounding landscape despite the complete absence of any visible evidence of past occupation. The official records related to the 1962 demolition and subsequent investigations remain sealed in various archives, classified under legal protections that show no signs of expiring or being modified. The persistent official interest in maintaining secrecy about these materials indicates that authorities continue to believe public disclosure would serve no beneficial purpose. Multiple attempts by researchers and journalists to access these documents through Freedom of Information requests have been unsuccessful, with government agencies citing exemptions related to ongoing security concerns and public safety considerations. These responses suggest that the Whitmore case may have connections to contemporary issues that are not apparent from publicly available historical records. The brothers' disappearance and the systematic destruction of their facility represent a permanent loss of knowledge about technical capabilities that operated outside normal social boundaries during a critical period in American frontier development. Whatever they accomplished during their years in Newton County vanished with them, leaving only fragmentary evidence and persistent questions about the true extent of their achievements. The case provides evidence that some individuals during the frontier period possessed knowledge and resources that were far ahead of their apparent social and economic circumstances, raising questions about the true nature of rural society and the extent to which isolated communities might have harbored activities that challenged conventional understanding of 19th century American development. Modern researchers remain interested in the Whitmore case because it represents one of the few documented examples of sophisticated technical operations conducted in rural 19th century America. The brothers' capabilities and organizational skills exceeded what should have been possible given the resources and knowledge available in their historical context, suggesting access to networks or institutions that provided support for activities that transcended normal frontier limitations. Perhaps most significantly, the Whitmore case demonstrates that some historical mysteries may remain permanently unsolved, not because evidence does not exist, but because the evidence reveals capabilities that challenge comfortable assumptions about technological and social progress. The continued classification of investigation materials suggests that some discoveries raise questions that extend beyond historical curiosity. In the end, the mystery of the Whitmore brothers lies not in what they actually accomplished, but in the demonstration that such accomplishments were possible at all given the social conditions and technical resources of their era. Their hidden facility represents evidence that human ingenuity and determination can achieve results that defy conventional understanding of what should be possible under frontier conditions. The sounds that once emanated from the Whitmore house have been silent for over a century, but the questions they raised continue to echo through the Arkansas hills. The brothers created something in their hidden attic that challenged every assumption about frontier capabilities and individual achievement, leaving behind evidence that some possibilities extend far beyond what historical records typically document or acknowledge. Today, the former site remains empty and largely forgotten by anyone outside Newton County, but the implications of what was discovered there continue to influence how authorities approach similar cases and protect communities from activities that might operate beyond normal social boundaries. Whatever the brothers achieved during their years of isolation vanished with them, but the questions raised by their work persist in ways that ensure their mystery will never be completely forgotten or fully understood.